I'm going to introduce our first speaker. His name's Rob Michaels, and he actually has a ministry called Serve and Protect. Lamar Moore and I met him 2010, 2011, and we sat down at a Cracker Barrel, which is a great place to meet anytime you want to meet anybody, is at a Cracker Barrel. But we sat down and we were talking with Ron. He was just getting started, and man, what passion this guy had. Because let's face it, in the law enforcement community, there's a word we don't say, and that's suicide. We don't talk about suicides. We don't talk about people that have even attempted suicides. It's just taboo. But guess what? We're losing as many officers and first responders to suicide as we are to bad guys. And that's the ones we know about. Rob will tell you more. The ones we don't know about are the ones that are retired. You know, they've moved to another state. Nobody even knows they were a cop or anything that they were going through. And Rob has got a passion to put a stop to that. He's got a passion for those suffering with PTSD. He's got a passion to make administrators understand that PTSD is not taboo. It's not a reason to get rid of your officers. It's treatable. You can bring them back to work. So, Rob, I'm going to let you come now and tell us about Serve and Protect. Give Rob a hand.
Ask him to put this up here because it may be that I use my hands a little bit to talk. Not sign language, but I think there's some Italian in me somewhere. Before I forget it, on the table out there, you'll see a few stacks of these. They're free. Take them. Better yet, on the back, it's information, Go Therefore Ministries. They're based out of Mount Juliet, Tennessee. You call them, you tell them you want to give these away to the people that serve in law enforcement or the military or doctors or nurses, and they've got them custom made for each profession. They're free. They'll ship them to you. Give them out by the handful. That's what I'm doing. I don't want any left. I'm not taking any back with me. In fact, I won't even take that one. Let's pray. Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are my strength, and you are my Redeemer. Amen. Saturday morning, 2 a.m. Rob, I'm either going to eat my gun or come to Jesus. Last month at 5 p.m. Rob, I'm on my way to get a gun. I can't take this anymore. Rob, can you get to Vandy? A chief's son was killed in an accident, slipped in a pool. Rob, can you get to Vandy? An officer's son shot himself. Put a .40 caliber with a black talon right here. Now here's the miracle. The bullet exited right here, and the only thing he had was a damaged palate. Yeah, that's a miracle. Rob, can you come to Lawrence County? That's just a few miles from here. A deputy committed suicide. And then his wife called. My husband committed suicide, and I don't want to live without him. I'm laying on the grave, and I'm going to drink myself to death. There are calls coming in from Middle Tennessee, Ohio, Texas, Washington State, from coast to coast, from north and south. Post-traumatic stress, suicidal ideations, addictions, marital issues, fired without cause, disposable heroes. And that's perhaps the most disgusting that drives me absolutely crazy. I had one guy called. He said, I was fired because of post-traumatic stress. Byron Shelton. Byron was a deputy with Lawrence County Sheriff's Department. He got a call to respond to a domestic. They could hear the guy saying, I'm going to kill you, with an expletive. Byron pulled up, being a deputy in a small county or a poor county. The closest backup was 30 minutes away. As he pulled up, he heard the cop saying, the bad guy saying, I'm going to kill you. Byron ran in. The bad guy turned, shot him twice, here and here. Byron returned fire and killed the man. He was awarded a Medal of Honor by the governor of Tennessee. A year later, they couldn't find light duty for him, so they wrote him a letter and said, "Dear Byron, because of the duties you sustained in the line of duty, you're hereby terminated." Fortunately, he fought it and he got his job back. But there's Jason Zangara down in Florida. Jason was working in West Palm when Obama's motorcade came through and somebody rode over a police officer. He was trapped underneath a pickup truck on his motorcycle. Jason crawled underneath to be there with that man while he died. His department said, "You weren't there." Fortunately, a White House photographer caught him under the vehicle and photographed it. Then they sent him to therapists. 2 therapists said, yes, he's got post-traumatic stress. A 3rd therapist said, oh, no. Cops don't get post-traumatic stress. That's just part of the job. So on my post on Facebook, where I pretty much called him an idiot, I said, this guy must still practice frontal lobotomies. I mean, that's absurd. Anybody can get post-traumatic stress. Anyone from a traumatic incident. Then there was Kurt Lawless over in Missouri who was awarded the Medal of Valor. He's still without a job and needs help, and we're getting him a therapist. Serve and Protect began in 2011. I've been running a nonprofit. I went to church one Sunday morning. I attend Fellowship Bible Church. Somebody had the audacity to sit in my 2nd row seat on the aisle. It pretty much says Rob Michaels on the seat. Anybody that goes to that church knows that's my seat, except for this yahoo, and he sits right in my seat, and I didn't feel appropriate. Get out. So I sat in the front row, and I knew it was time to change. I just felt it in my heart. Something was moving. I know what it was. It was God. I said, what do you want me to do? He put Serve and Protect on my heart. I'll tell you a little bit how we got to that later. So I went home and put together the plan. Serve and Protect is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. File my own papers, file my own 501c3 application. It was approved in 10 weeks. That's God, not Lois Lerner. You know, I served as an MP. I was in uniform in the Detective Bureau in Norfolk, Virginia. It was in the 70s. It was different back then, guys. It's not the same day and age. And I knew, just from being a chaplain with the FOP, that there was a lot of hurt out there and our guys needed help. And there wasn't anything happening. So, I launched it. And why is it needed? Criminal justice and emergency services often destroys families. And we'll get into some statistics here in a second. Anxiety and trauma on the job causes depression, addiction, all of that. Let's get to some statistics. Every 17 hours, a police officer commits suicide. Now that statistic, and you'll appreciate this, and you might even know the guy, Dr. John Larned with the FBI. He now teaches at the FBI Academy, was with the Behavioral Analysis Unit. In 2010, he published a report. Every 17 hours, somebody in law enforcement commits suicide. And as Paul said, we don't know about retired guys. They just disappear into the distance. But let me tell you something. If you've ever been a cop and you're not a cop, boy, do you miss it. They miss the fellowship. They miss being somebody. 75% of officers have been divorced. 87% of firefighters. 40% of first responders are involved in domestic violence. 85% of first responders, 35% of dispatchers experience some symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Sleeplessness, anxiety, flashbacks, all of those things. Now you notice I didn't mention alcohol. That is one symptom. But that's self-medicating. They're not alcoholics to be alcoholics. They're trying to shut up the madness in their head. I had one guy call me, in fact, the guy from Missouri, they told him that he couldn't have PTSD because he wasn't an alcoholic. I've got illustrations, but it wouldn't be appropriate. And here's the situation. Imagine when you pull up on a scene, an accident scene, smoke coming from under the hood, the door's locked, and there's somebody inside the car with his head on the steering wheel. He can't unlock the door. What do? You break the window. You reach in to get him out. What happens if you slice your arm going through there? All that adrenaline, you're going through, your arm's bleeding like crazy. You get him out, you save his life. Paramedics come, they take you to the hospital, they get it stitched up. After they clean it out, there's a follow-up protocol to make sure that it doesn't get infected. They take the stitches out, they watch it, they monitor it. But what if in that same accident, as you're pulling the father out, you look in the back seat and there's a baby and a package shifted and crushed its skull? Then what? That's an emotional wound. And that wound demands treatment just as much as that physical wound. That wound left untreated, not can, but more than likely will. Not everybody responds to trauma the same way. I mean, I saw a carload in an accident, and all 5 of them died, and it snapped their necks. I remember it. I don't have nightmares about it. There are a lot of those things that I saw. I just didn't happen to experience the trauma. Trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. Post-traumatic stress goes beyond that. Post-traumatic stress really is where a year from now, if we run into each other, you go, oh, Rob, you remember when we were at that conference together? You pull it out of long-term memory, and then you park it back there again. Post-traumatic stress is when that memory gets stuck right here or in that area. It floats. You can't get rid of it. You think about it all the time. You know, if it's a rape victim, she sees that person coming at her. If it's a police officer, let me tell you something. That officer in Ferguson needs significant treatment. And all he is getting is significant bashing by people who wouldn't know what it was like to serve on the streets if it bit them in the butt. They'll criticize us, but they won't congratulate us. They'll throw us under the bus in a minute. And that's what has happened over there. Anyhow, I'm politicizing, sorry. But the point of the matter is that memory, and it's not just one memory, it's cumulative. How many accidents have you investigated where there's a fatality, or homicides that you've been on, or child abuse cases that you've been called to? How about when a baby's been molested? You just want to take that guy and just go out behind a shed? You get angry, and that memory gets stuck. You can't sleep. You go to a therapist, or you go to a psychiatrist. What do they give you? Pills. Ah, you're angry? We'll give you an anti-anxiety anger pill. We'll give you a pill for depression. We're going to give you some uppers, some downers. We're going to take you sideways. Well, then what happens when the department finds out you're on pills? You're done. So, what happens is guys just don't ask for help. They keep it to themselves. And that infection that's in their head called post-traumatic stress festers. And there comes a point when, like Mo or like Jason, call me and say, I can't do this. I'm going to kill myself. Gary from Florida had been struggling with post-traumatic stress for 12 years. He was going behind his partner to an emergency call. She got broadsided and ejected from her car and splashed into a concrete wall. He tried for 12 years. I sent him to a therapist in Florida. The next day he called and said, I cannot believe this. It's so much better. So what do? We've got a crisis line. We partnered with an organization called Safe Call Now, based out of Washington State. And that was a God thing. I called one crisis line. I won't name them. But I said, here's what I want to do. I want it to be nationwide. They said, you know what? If you've got $1 million, we can go nationwide. I said, well, you know, if I got $1 million, what do I need you for? I mean, really, you know? And so, by the way, we operate on a $35,000 a year budget. That's it. That's all we get. God willing, we'll get more. But for right now, that's what we get. And it covers what we need. But the point is, when they call the crisis line, Sean's folks are all law enforcement, firefighters, either active or retired, so they get it. And they'll talk to the person that calls in. Half of those calls come to me. The other half, they get them into a dual treatment facility for addictions and for PTSD. Because the addiction will come back if you don't treat the post-traumatic stress. If they come to me, then we offer them a chaplain. Randy over here is one of our chaplains. We've got more than 100 of our own, but through joining International Conference of Police Chaplains, Federation of Fire Chaplains, I've now got access to 3,500 chaplains. Because I decided when I got a call one night at 10 o'clock and I couldn't find a chaplain, that wasn't going to happen again. I will not let that happen. For the most part, when people call in, they want to see a trauma therapist. Well, they want to talk to somebody. They want to see a therapist. I only refer to therapists that have in their toolbox EMDR or rapid resolution. EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a lot of words. It means your eyes move back and forth, or they touch you back and forth, or sounds back and forth. You might think it's weird, but it works. Now, it might take 5-6 sessions, but what happens is with that memory being stuck, it's got to be jarred loose. It wants to get back to long-term memory. But when it's stuck, it triggers the amygdala, and you get the fear, and you get the sleeplessness, and you get the anxiety, and all of those things. So then you self-medicate, whether it's pills or booze. Well, if they call us, we get them assigned to one of those kinds of therapists. We have a case management system now, thanks to the Frisk Foundation. And when they call in, we enter all their information. We know who they are, where they're calling from, how to reach them, what their presenting symptoms are, what caused them to feel that way. We assign them to a trauma therapist. I've got 3 volunteer staff now. One is specifically designated for 12-step programs, Celebrate Recovery, to get them hooked up after they get out of therapy, or if they've been in residential care, when they come home, they got to have somebody to walk with them, so we make that happen. Then I've got 2 ladies that work with me, and they follow up. Because, you know, if you give an officer an instruction, here, go see this therapist. Here's the address, the phone number, and everything. A week later, did you go see it? Well, no, I'm going. Well, buddy, I'm going to be on your back till you do go, because I know what will happen if you don't. And I can tell you that I get calls back. I didn't go. I messed up. What can I do? So we start all over again. But that's what we do. Our whole focus is to serve families and save lives. We work with the officers, the firefighters, dispatchers, corrections, and we work with their families. The lady that was laying on her husband's grave is one of my biggest proponents in Lawrence County. Man, you're hurting? Call Rob. You know, handing out cards, handing out flyers. You know, she believes because it affected her life. I had one lady call me that her husband committed suicide. He was an abuser. He beat her. He had had 3 affairs. And he called her and he said, well, I know you've been to see a lawyer. She didn't know how he knew that. Well, he had a GPS tracking device on her car. She said, yeah, I did talk to a lawyer, and I'm gone. I can't take this anymore. He shot himself while he was on the phone with her. She found out later he had a camera in the bedroom that he could watch 24/7 because he wanted to make sure that she had an affair. So he suggested that she do so. Suicide not only kills the first responder, it kills their family. Because the questions come. What could I have done? Not only from the family, but from the departments. But my friends, one of the biggest tragedies is when you've got administrators that make it so that their staff, their people are afraid to say they're hurting. When you leave that unaddressed, you are killing that officer. And if you let an officer go because he has post-traumatic stress and you don't want to help him out, you need to get out of Dodge because you're not worth the 10 on your chest. And I'm angry because that happens too often. I don't have time to tell you all of them that are going through that very thing. They'll lie. I know one officer in Toledo got arrested because the sheriff switched the report and made it go against him. That's right. So, we fight for officers. If they go into treatment, we get them the Family Emergency Leave Act. We make sure they do that so the department can't fire them. Because let me tell you, they do. They will try. How many of you here, and don't raise your hand, are going to call employee assistance if you've got a significant issue? See, that's where we come in. I had one guy stand me down one time and say, it's peer support, man. What you do is not needed. And I looked at him, and this was in a significant meeting. I said, how many guys have called you about killing themselves? If you're a peer support guy, how many times is a guy going to come into you and go, dude, I'm on coke and I can't quit. I need help. I beat my wife. I'm abusing whatever. They're not going to call you. They're not going to talk to you. We're that safety net that's out there because we're confidential. We're 24/7. We're coast to coast. And we put them with people. If they want a chaplain, we hook them up with a chaplain in a different area. Because who picks the chaplain for the department? Chief. Now, how much time do I have left? Do I have a couple of minutes? Because now I want to get into the good part. How did I get there? Well, I call that a recalculated journey. My life's verse is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him with all your heart, and He will make your path straight. But that's a conditional offer. So, God puts people into our path to direct us where He wants us to go if we listen. Think about Moses. His path was redirected. Think about Jonah. I'd rather not do the belly of the whale thing. And I'd rather not be vomited up on a beach. There's sometimes I feel like I'm in the belly of the whale. How about the Apostle Paul? Took a lot to get that man's attention. How about Matthew the tax collector? Do you think he was disappointed sitting around collecting those taxes, living high on the hog? No, until somebody came into him and said, Matthew. You see, through other people, Jesus Himself directs our path. In 1970, I was working at Sears. There was a guy named Doug Nelson. Doug was a manager trainee, and I was a schmuck that worked in the back in the garden department slinging bags of grass seed. Rob, we need to join the National Guard. I said, we? You got a mouse in your pocket? What are you talking about? I'm number 1 in the draft. I'm 265. See ya. Well, he talked me into it. I said, all right, I'll do it, but you're going to have to go into the MP unit. I didn't know that God had a plan, that all these years later that would have made a difference, so I became an MP. Well, being in the Guard in 1973, I was working at J.C. Penney's. Guy I grew up with, Tommy Crislip, walked by, and he goes, what are you selling TVs for? You're an MP. Come join Norfolk Police Department. Okay. So I went and joined Norfolk Police Department. There at Norfolk Police Department, I met a guy named Drew Grant. Drew was the chief's son. Now, when you were on about 1.5 years, and you got a new partner and they said it's the chief's son, how many of you would have volunteered for that? Well, I was the junior guy. They said, Rob, you have a new partner. Not do you want one. Turns out he knew my wife. We got to be best friends. He was a believer. Now, I was trained by guys that came on in the 50s and 60s. We all know what that means. And so I was out one night, and we were making an arrest, and this guy gave me a hard time, and I reached over and grabbed him right here like this, and squeezed. And I got ready to knock his head off. And Drew put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, he called me Bobby back then. Nobody needs to call me Bobby now. But he said, Bobby, do you need to do that? Now, the kid's looking like, it's candy camera. And I looked at Drew and I said, what? He said, do you need to hit him? I said, I don't need to, but I want to. The kid's a jerk. Well, he is, but why don't you choose not to do that? And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm standing here, I would not be here tonight if it wasn't for Drew Grant. Who did I call first when I started this? Who was my first board of director member? Drew Grant. He is more important to me than any other experience I've had because he set me on the right path, because I was not on the right path. Then in 1978, I was a detective. We went to a church service, and I heard a guy named Dan DeHaan speak, chaplain for the Atlanta Falcons. It was the 70s. He had long hair and a beard. He said he went to Columbia Bible College. I said, well, that's cool. I think I'll go there. My wife says, I think you got to be called to do that. said, I think I am. I mean, it's not that my walk with the Lord was non-existent. It was just he was bringing me along with a hook. His rod was bringing me along. So I go to Columbia Bible College, ended up getting into radio, ended up moving to Wheaton College to get my master's, needed a job. So a friend of mine that was a broadcaster, a guy named David Maines, he was a radio broadcaster, he goes, go see the people at Domain. Go see Dave Thompson. He'll give you a job. I said, I'm not creative. What am I going to do? He said, you can drive a truck. So I'll go up and talk to Dave. Dave says, I'm going to hire you. I want you to come inside and work in the agency. And I laughed in the man's face. It was a really good job interview. And he says, what's the matter? I said, I don't have a creative bone in my body. I was a cop. And he said, I think you do. Now, that's significant, and I'll tell you why. All the materials that we have, the website, the cards, the flyers, I designed every one of those. Because we don't have the money to do it. God made sure I could do it myself. God's work, in God's way, will have God's supply. And sometimes that's talent that you didn't know you had. So up at Wheaton, I got involved in marketing, ended up working with Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Hospital, Covenant College here, all those things. And I got recruited by a record label to come to Nashville, be VP of marketing, because I had done a little bit of work with Bill Gaither and Sandy Patty and some of those people. Well, that didn't go well. I caught them hiding returns on the loading dock, and the cop in me just wouldn't let that stand. So they got rid of me. So sometimes God puts you in a spot where you have to do the right thing, but it will cost you. The good news is when I got let go there, I got picked up by a little group called DeGarmo and Key. If you know anything about Christian music, pioneers. And went to work with the record company that they co-owned. I ended up working with DC Talk, Rebecca St. James, Audio Adrenaline, the Newsboys. Even worked a Mariah Carey Christmas album and a song for Johnny Cash. In 1987, I started a company called Lord & Michaels Entertainment. That was me and the Lord. And I got the name because Lord and Taylor is because there was a Jewish guy that knew he couldn't get a job with a Jewish name. So he started his company and called it Lord, and he was the tailor. That's where Lord & Taylor came from. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. I'll take that. It was Lord & Michaels. 2011, in 2001, the Newsboys hired me. It was post 9/11, and I came up with an idea. They had a tour going out, and they were going to cancel it. I said, don't do that. Let's use it to raise money for the families of the police and firefighters that died in the towers. We got the Red Cross, or the Salvation Army, to join in with us. They did it and raised some money. In 2003 to 2008, I managed a speaker. Former mob guy. I won't name him. But we did well. I built his career to $400,000 the year I left. It ended kind of abruptly when I put him in jail because he wrote me bad checks. But the last guy that I ever arrested was a mafia boss, so I like that. I became a lodge chaplain with the FOP in 2008. And in 2011, they made me state chaplain. So I greet you from the FOP from the great state of Tennessee. And then, a little bit later, I met a guy named Keith Moses at Shop with a Cop. You know Keith. And Keith said, so you're chaplain, huh? I said, yeah. So next thing I know, I get a call from Scott Augenbaum with the FBI. He goes, Rob, let's have breakfast. So we did, and he goes, this is funny. I'm a Jewish guy recruiting a Christian to be an FBI chaplain. Scott's a good guy. So they appointed me an FBI chaplain. 41 years after all of that started, I was sitting in that church seat when God spoke to my heart, and I wanted to obey. We read Proverbs 3, 5, and 7. But let me tell you this. Do I have just a minute? Okay, here's the thing. That is a conditional verse. Everybody wants to go to the end. God's going to make my path straight. I don't have to worry. Why worry? Be happy. That's not what it says. You might as put a big old if right in front of the first verse. If you trust, that means absolute reliance on the Lord. The question is, who do you trust? It says, trust the Lord the Lord God, the creator of the universe, the one that saves your soul. Trust him. And such trust demands what? Obedience. Trust him with all your heart. That means not being a casual Christian, to use the song DeGarmo and Key had. I don't want to be a casual Christian. I don't want to live a lukewarm life. I want to light up the night with an everlasting light. I don't want to be a casual Christian life. So here's the point. How much of your heart does God want? How much? That's exactly right. How much do we give him? We struggle to get to all, don't we? But he knows that. That's why there's grace. But our heart's desire has got to be to give everything. All to Jesus, I surrender. Some to him I freely give. Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't say that, does it? Then it says, not leaning on your own understanding. Guys, tough for cops. Because we figure we got the answer. You know, we don't want anybody to tell us when we're wrong. We know what we know, what we know. And that's where we get in trouble. We have a little problem with something called trust. We're callous. We're skeptical. When I went through Columbia Bible College, at the end, when I was graduating, the guy said, okay, we're going to review your psychological profile. You don't seem to trust. You seem to be skeptical. You seem to be... And he started doing... He says, what can explain that? I said, I was a cop. And he shut the book and he goes, that's it. I was actually told by a therapist one time I was the most emotionally shallow person he ever met in my life. Or his life. My life too, I guess. But the point is, we cover our hearts with a cast iron shield because we're not going to be hurt. My brothers, we can't lean on our own understanding. And then it says, acknowledge him in all your ways. What does that mean? Submission. It means surrendering to God. That's why you bow. When it says at the end, what's going to happen? Every knee will and every tongue. That's exactly right. And that's what God expects of us who call him Jesus, who call him Savior. Romans says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That's why we put guys in with therapists, to renew their mind, to get their thinking back straight so they can think about what's good and perfect. There's a cost. If we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. If indeed, does anybody know what it asks us to share in? His sufferings. My friend, there is a cost to following Jesus. It's not sacrifice if it doesn't cost me anything. It cost Jesus everything. It cost God his son. So the question is, where is your heart? Who do you trust? Where are you going? Who are you listening to? And where do you invest your time? Is God speaking through somebody or through his word to direct you to something that you really didn't want to do? Or you're afraid to start? Let me tell you something. When I started Serve and Protect, I didn't have any money. Still don't. But every time a bill is due, God pays it. I can tell you that right now. He is faithful. I'm going to leave you with this from the Message. Proverbs 3:5 and following. Trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try and figure out everything on your own. Brothers, that's us. Listen for God's voice in everything you do. Everywhere you go, he's the one who will keep you on track. Don't assume that you know it all. Man, we're stepping on toes. Your body, run to God, run from evil. Your body will glow with health, and your very bones will vibrate with life. Honor God with everything you own. Give him the first and the best. Your barns will burst, your wine vats will brim over. But don't, dear friend, resent God's discipline. Don't sulk under his loving correction. It's God, it's the child he loves that God corrects. A father's delight is behind all this. Sorry I took more than my allotted time, but I thank you for allowing me to be here.